Further debate? I'd like to recognize the member from Guelph.
Thank you, Speaker. It's always an honor to rise here in the House and today to speak on Bill 5. Bill 5 has the word Protect Ontario in the title. And so, Speaker, I want to ask, how do you protect Ontario with a bill that gives the government unprecedented and extraordinary powers to exempt corporations from the very laws, rules, and regulations that protect the people and places we love in Ontario? Now, I want to be clear. Greens support mining. We recognize the importance of a critical mineral mining to electric vehicle strategy. We understand the important role that critical minerals will play in renewable energy in helping Ontario attract investment in the transition to a green economy. It's unfortunate the government doesn't always recognize the importance of renewables when it comes to that transition, but we recognize it. But we also have to be clear, Speaker, that First Nations rights, worker health and safety laws, environmental protections are not red tape. Those laws were brought forward to protect people, to protect First Nations rights, to protect water, to protect the land and the animals that sustain life. And to suggest that somehow you're protecting Ontario by putting all of that at risk is not right. And it will not facilitate development. As a matter of fact, it likely will slow down development because the government will not have the social license and the support of the people of Ontario to move forward, and it will not have the consent of First Nations. I'd like to quote Apawataskat First Nations chief in describing this bill, and I quote, "Ontario is declaring our homelands open for invasion of massive-scale mining and other development by removing protections for species at risk, democratic oversight, and protection for our rights and lands," end quote. I want to remind the government that under Section 35 of the Constitution, they have a duty to consult. And I would argue they have a moral obligation to obtain consent before moving forward with development. But let's be clear, Schedule 9 of this bill establishes so-called special economic zones that remove all provincial rules, local planning rules, worker health and safety laws, environmental protections for hand-picked companies decided not by the people of Ontario, but by cabinet, not with legislative oversight. So these zones essentially will have no rules, no oversight, and no consultation with ordinary people and First Nations. This is the exact kind of legislation that the BC government introduced last month and had to withdraw because of public backlash. This is an extraordinary overreach of power by the provincial government to exempt companies from the very laws that we as a legislature should have the right, and should we have a duty and an obligation and responsibility to our constituents to have oversight over. Schedule 10 of this bill repeals Ontario's award-winning Endangered Species Act, which the government has already weakened. But let's be clear about some of the things in this bill. So first of all, politics, not science, is going to decide what an endangered species is. The government now has changed the rule that says if you're a company that wants to kill species, right now you have to get a permission to do that. Now the government just says, oh, you have to just file your intent to kill them. Don't need permission, just let us know you're going to kill them off. The provisions that narrow the scope of how they define habitat will actually put our communities at risk. Think about what happened this summer with the floods in the GTA. $1.3 billion worth of damage every hour. Think of the ice storm that just hit Ontario last month, where we had communities that went weeks without power. When you destroy the environment that protects us, you put us at more risk, our property, our communities, our businesses, our property at risk from the increasing frequency and severity of climate-fueled extreme weather events. Schedule 3 of the bill exempts 2 major projects from environmental assessment, the Eagle's Nest Mine and the Dresden Dump. I'm sorry, geez, what could go wrong, Speaker? Exempting a dump, exempting a garbage dump from an environmental assessment. You know, those are in place to make sure, you know, things don't leach into our waterway, to make sure that land around that dump doesn't become contaminated, especially if it's agricultural lands. Schedule 7 of the bill removes the Heritage Act, which removes the need for archaeological assessments, which I've had First Nations tell me is like open season on First Nations burial grounds. So, Speaker, I say to the government, work with us. Work with us. Let's get rid of interprovincial trade barriers. Let's work on diversifying our trade partners. But let's not remove the protections for our environment, the people and places we love in Ontario.
Thank you. Questions? I recognize the Minister of Energy and Mines.
Madam Speaker, I want to thank the members opposite for their perspectives. I did want to ask the member, the leader, and all opposition members who will vote against Bill 5, what do they know that the President of the Ontario Mining Association doesn't when they issued an endorsement of this bill? What do you know that the President of Alamos Gold, that the head of the Sudbury Chamber of Commerce, that the chair of the Sudbury Chamber of Commerce, the head of the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, the head of President of Frontier Lithium, the CEO of the Toronto Board of Trade, the CEO of Generation Mining, the Vice President of Agnico Eagle, the Executive Director of Mine Connect, the CEO of Wailu, the CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, the President of IM Gold, the CEO of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, the CEO of the Ontario Business Council. What do you know that every economic institute in the country is endorsing about Bill 5?
The member from Guelph.
I appreciate the member's question. I always like to debate with the minister. What do I know? First Nations in this province are saying this bill violates the duty to consult. What do I know? Workers, everyday people are saying, who gives you the power to create special economic zones to exempt worker health and safety laws, environmental protections, and the duty to consult? What I know is people saying, you know what? Protecting species matters. So we can work together to facilitate development and to facilitate mining, but we have to do it in a way that is responsible and respects and protects the people and places we love in Ontario.
Question? The member from London Fanshawe.
Thank you, Speaker. You know, as I stand here today and listen to the debates, it's almost illogical that we're continuing to bring legislation to this House that literally strips away things that we should be considering, like the special economic zones. That, to me, is an egregious piece of overreach when it comes to government. And we're all outraged what's happening in the U.S., where the president is stripping laws and taking away rights, but yet here we are doing something very similar. So I want to ask the member, with regards to consultation, this government doesn't have a good track record of consultation when it comes to land bills, when it comes to development bills. Do you know, has anybody told you if they're actually going to travel this bill? Are they actually going to have public consultation and a committee process when it comes down to passing this legislation?
The member from Guelph.
Well, I have no idea what the government's plan is in terms of traveling around the province with this bill. I would hope they would spend some time in the north, especially in First Nations communities. The one thing I can tell you, though, it is extraordinary to give the government the kind of power these special economic zones gives the government, especially in a political system where you have a unitary executive and legislative branch to provide no oversight. I mean, this is like actually, communist China has special economic zones that give the government extraordinary powers. Like, the kind of doing the same thing here. I believe in legislative oversight. I believe in the duty to consult. I believe the people of Ontario should have input as part of the debate over rules and laws, not special economic zones that remove that.
Questions? I recognize the member from Wellington, Halton Hills.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, with this legislation, our government is making a record $20 million annual investment in species conservation. So my question to the member is, how can his party justify opposing a plan that makes unprecedented government investment in supporting, protecting, and restoring species?
Member from Guelph.
I appreciate the opportunity to answer my first question for my neighbor, Wellington Halton Hills, to say that repealing the Endangered Species Act and replacing it with some watered-down act that is based on political decisions, not science decisions, that actually says to proponents, you don't have to ask permission to kill species, you just have to let us know you're going to kill them. That narrows the definition of habitat in a way that's actually going to make it harder for us to protect ourselves from floods and fires and other extreme weather events, just is the wrong way to go.
Thank you.